And they identified the people who visit Salem for the Wiccan and witchcraft and paganism scene as the studs and tattoos demographic, which I was very offended by, even though the person that they had in the picture kind of looked like me with a top hat, and I thought that was cute. But I said, that's not the person coming here. If 84% of people are saying, I love Salem for the modern witch, we know that 84% of 1 million people coming here every year are not witches or pagans. That's a super powerful piece of information to know for me, for all of you that might want to do education work here. It means that there are massive numbers of people out in the world that have no idea what a witch is at all, but want to know. Why do they want to know? Probably because they want to believe in magic. I would say that's the first thing. I do think you'll have your share of people who understand witchcraft as a form of nature reverence and that type of thing. And you will find those ecology conscious people too. I think the vast majority is, and I know people hate this term, but it's so old school, I love it. The Joe Sixpack and Harriet Housewife types out there in the world, I know it's horrible. It's such a delicious term for me. Those people,
I think actually we're actually in that demographic.
I like that. But those people come in and they're like, oh gee, Mildred, I want to go see these witches and have them cast a spell, you know, and you know what, I'm okay with that. I'm not a snob. If they want to come in and find something magical to make their life better than this dull, spiritual-free, lifeless, magic-free thing, where they just die and that's it, if their experience with us, if all it does is tell them there's a magical world out there, then we as witches did our job. 84%. So the educational opportunity in that is astronomical. So when anybody thinks, well, I could never go, you know, Salem's all schlock, it's all this, and you know, I can't deal with that. You know, I say, well, what about the opportunity to change that? You know, whether it's changing me, you know what I mean? Maybe they don't like, you know, I think it's interesting because when Angie and I first met, she changed me a bit. I even let her come in and write a few things on my website. I said, well, let's like tweak this. Maybe we can find a mutual ground. Because I'm the easiest person to work with usually when you know, once you sit at the table with me, I'm like, well, maybe, you know, I'm not taking off this shirt, but, you know, I'm still going to dress like the Liberace of the dark world, but maybe I just need a candelabra and a piano. But we all express ourselves magically in different ways. Any more questions?
I have a question. I first came to Salem, I would say like 15 years ago because my friend saw it on the Travel Channel, and where did, I mean, you're talking about posting, what I would know, because I live in like a tourist Mecca, Nelson County, Virginia, home of the Waltons, and their tourism people, everything they do is so boring. And whose idea was it to make Salem the witch city, and who has, like they've got a witch on a broomstick on their police cars and the fire trucks. I mean, that's incredible. Like,
well, it's interesting you say that because there's so many people trying to change it, and during all these meetings I've had to sit through that make my eyes bleed over the last few years. One of the things that always struck me so amusing is like, we want to be more like Newport, Rhode Island, when at the time Newport was desperately trying to be up. They had a book on the bestsellers list called Haunted Newport, and suddenly, you know, you have ghost tours going through all those mansions. Suddenly ghost tours are like the huge thing everywhere now. And here Salem is going, we don't want to be associated with any of this occult and paranormal crap. We want to be like everybody else. When our visitor numbers are higher than most of those people. Most of those tourism towns would kill to be Salem. And here we are trying to squander it away. But what happened was in because it's interesting, because this was obviously the witch city in the sense that the trials happened here in 1692. When did it become first capitalized? I mean, I'm no historical expert. You can get, there's a wonderful book in some of the tourist shops called Salem from Nomkeg, which is our original name, from Nomkeg to the Witch City, by our local historian, Jim McAllister. And a lot of my information about that comes from that. But back in the late 1800s, I think one of the first things they did, for 2 centuries, they didn't want it. You know, they didn't want any association, because remember, most of these people were descended from the people who hung witches. And some of them were descended from the hanged, but far more were descended from the people that took part in this hysteria. So they didn't want to be associated with that. It was all kinds of guilt. So for 200 years, all you heard about Salem was maritime trade and all of this. the witch thing was kind of a blip in history. It wasn't as big. It certainly was nowhere near as big as it is now and in the last, several decades. And so in the late 1800s, there was a witch, suddenly somebody decided to open a Witch City fish market. The famous Daniel Lowe department store, which is now Rockefeller's restaurant, they began to make little silver witch spoons. And they were the first people, I believe it was 1892, the same year, interestingly enough, the Ouija board was released, but not on Salem originally, Baltimore.
But Parker Brothers is huge.
Not till 68. Parker Brothers bought the Ouija board in 1967 and it became the #1 selling game board in 68, and I don't know why I know that. But trivial knowledge. But the little witch spoons and the cards, all the greeting cards. And the interesting thing to note about those greeting cards is I've heard all these bizarre theories about where the green-faced witch came from, in the Middle Ages and people being beaten and all these other bizarre. And the reality is none of those postcards have a green witch on them. The green witch came about with Margaret Hamilton and the Wizard of Oz, and only because they had just spewed Technicolor out at all these people with all those flowers, and it was the first color anybody had ever seen in a movie. So now they're like, well, we got to bring this witch out. What do we do? Oh, spray her green. And that was really how that came about. There was no insidious. Like I get a little skittish sometimes when some of our locals will scream about the Green Witch and how offensive, and it's the same as a hook-nosed Jew and Hitler and this and that. It wasn't done as propaganda. It was a production decision on the spur of the moment of, let's throw this out. And it's kind of why in 2005, Sean and I were green for the Witch's Bubbles. Wicked came out, and I said, let's get a little saucy with that. But someone realized they could market it. And the tough thing is, all these decades later, you had Lori Cabot come to town. She was a huge part of the modern witch coming here. You had Samantha, probably the single biggest thing to ever increase witch tourism here was the filming of the show Bewitched. Because it was within 1 year of that the Witch Museum opened and Lori Cabot came to town. So both on the 1692 end and the modern witch end, you had, I would argue, both were inspired by this show and how it. So when people said, well, don't bring that statue of Samantha Stevens here, there's no history there. The hell there isn't. The last 40 years or so since that show was filmed has defined in many ways what this city is. And some people will say, well, you're exploiting a tragedy. How can you have fun here? How can you do that when it was a tragedy? Well, I would argue that when you have to look at a tragedy, and we have to look at Salem, we can never forget what happened here in 1692. It's too important to not allow it to happen again. But at the same time, we can't live in solemnity throughout it because all that does is reinforce the negativity. So let's have that balance where we throw witches' balls and parties and that sort of thing, never forgetting the importance of the ancestors and of the dead and those people who came before us. But, so there is that commercial, and let's face it, I'm in a tourism town, I have my commercial side too.
I think it's great. I wish
I love it.
where I live, it wasn't like all the walls and stuff.
I probably need a little color now and then. Anything else?
Well, I do have one. Go ahead.
I have a question.
Yes.
And please pardon what I say. Your Festival of the Dead, would you consider the role that you and, I don't know if your partners started it with you or something like that,
Yeah.
or when you first started, but pardon the word, but would that make you a unificator in this whole globe of?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because essentially I kind of started the whole thing to be a ball buster. I've done a lot of things over the years to do that, people don't know, but it certainly didn't stay that. I was aggravated with what they were doing to Halloween. I like Halloween just as much as I like Samhain. And I was like, look, this used to be fun. I grew up here, so I remember the fun. And I'm watching them take all the fun away, and Sean and I want to have fun, so we created this thing. So did I start out as that? Absolutely not. But as I began to do this year after year, I realized that there was a message coming through all of this that went far beyond just pagans and witches. It was that this was the 1 month out of the year where I can really reach out and say, confront your own mortality. Remember and respect your dead, for they will remember and respect you. And so you take, for example, one event that we do called the Dumb Supper. We're known for a lot of our parties and fun things, but we do this downstairs in the Grand Ballroom. And I create this giant veil between the worlds that everyone has to walk through. And when I first did it, I think I had a bunch of Celtic woo-woo sort of music, and it was all very like la-li-la. And it sort of lacked something. And then a couple of years in, I really wanted to bring it to the broadest possible audience. So that if you're going to sit, and for those who don't know what a dumb sober is, you're going to sit there for 3 hours eating your food and listening for the spirits and looking at this 12-foot altar where almost every person in the room brings some photo or memento of their dead. You want to feel that it's relatable to you. And let's face it, a lot of us live in interfaith relationships. You know, we might be away, but our husband or wife is Catholic or something, and they are coming along in the vacation, but do they really want to sit in this 3-hour dinner and have no sense what the hell's going on and feeling like all it is being a drum? No. So the music that I chose for this crossed the entire spectrum. I mean, I have everything from pagan chants to Dolly Parton singing the Lord's Prayer in the most haunting way, and Amazing Grace with the bagpipes, and things that cross across all these spiritual spectrums, for which the message is, I can connect. I've had people come in there that, and these are always my favorite stories, that are like, you know, it's a husband and they don't believe in any of this crap. Their wife sort of dragged them along, and what the hell am I doing here? I'm just eating the food and this is boring. And then they come to me at the end of it and they're like, I had this vision and my grandparents were dancing across the center of the floor, and why would that happen? And, you know, I mean, you always expect somebody in the pagan world, because we all want to be, you know, I mean, I'm not saying we don't all have the experience, but of course, we're all, you know, we all want to feel like we did at least. So you would sort of expect that from somebody that's there for that purpose, and also because they're open to it. But when someone comes in there and they're totally not open to it and they're scoffing at you and thinking, oh, this is dumb, and then they come up to you and say, I saw this, you know you're helping people reach the spirit. And so I think that it's created a unity in that we showed all these other places in Salem, businesses, witch and non-witch alike, that there's still something in all of this. Not just to be commercially viable, and I do think that is important, but also that there's a message that we witches here in Salem have to share with the world. And so, you know, just a couple of years ago, I added an event hosted by Pastor Phil Wyman of the Gathering Church, and he's an evangelical Christian. So I actually have one of those emergent church sort of events on the Christian perspective of death and the afterlife as one of the events. And to me, it fits in perfectly, because we all die, we're all going to go there. We don't all quite know what it is. Some of us have a better sense than others, but none of us are truly sure. So let's look at it. And in the store, you know, as Ed was saying, the rest of the year, the shop came out of, well, okay, here's my view on death and Halloween. What's my view on witchcraft? You know, how can I take this and bring it back to that continental old world, rootsy, gritty, you know, there was not enough of the magic I felt in a lot of the shops in Salem. Some of them are amazing. You know, I have some of the, you know, I have favorite shops to shop in Salem too, but I felt that they were all getting a little repetitive. So I wanted to get into something really different that explores some of the broader concepts of witchcraft, which to me include things like African American root work, you know, conjure magic and powwow, things that sort of stretch the boundaries of what witchcraft can be, and brought it all together in this shop. And so I found that the first thing that happened was I have a spirit altar in my shop. It's an ancestral altar. It actually began more as a general working altar. I figured, oh, people will buy a candle. If they don't know how to use it, I'll walk them over and I'll help them, because that's what I love about New Orleans. A lot of the stores in New Orleans have working altars. Nobody here does, and I found that a little odd. What I didn't know was going to happen. I had a woman come in for the 1-year anniversary of the Virginia Tech massacres, and she says, I work down at such and such attraction, the Wax Museum, I think it was, and she says, I heard you have an altar, and she brought this big note she wrote out for the Virginia Tech massacre victim. And as the weeks wore on, people were leaving message after message and thing, and, you know, pictures, and suddenly I'd come in and there'd be a picture of somebody's Doberman on there, I didn't know who it was, and, you know, there were all sorts of spirit things, and so I had now my mother's ashes on there and pictures of my dead, and I'd always had a couple, but it's just become more of that. Less, you know, the deities are on there, but it's become more of that ancestral thing. And at the end of October, we had over 400. So our private coven got together, and each of us grabbed a bunch of them, and we read them. You know, we went around the circle, and each of us read one at a time, and just kept going around, lighting them and burning them in the cauldron to sort of raise the energy of all these people, none of whom we knew. And they were tearjerkers, you know, when we were reading, you know, I loved you, grandmas, I held your hand every day in the emergency room, I knew that you were there with me, until we got to, you know, Grandpa, my girlfriend needs a new handbag. You know, there were a couple in there like that. But, you know, I realized that is what my store was going to be. again, just like Festival of the Dead, it was going to help people to reconnect with the idea that the spirit world is real, magic is real. No matter how mainstream or normal we get, never forget that simple fact, that magic is real, that it's there for you to tap into whenever you want it. That is a wellspring, the doorway to which is within your own heart and your own soul, and that when you reach into that, you can take that for yourself and help not only you, but other people, and become a light for those people that need help along their own path.
I'm going to ask Virginia Powell to come up here.
Oh, Virginia.
As you know, she's in charge of Temple Salute. Oh. And what's my official title? No, what's my official title? What am I declaring this title? The highest title that I have.
Elder and Archpriest.
Is it not Prince?
Prince of the Faith.
Okay. And as my right, I would like to award, if you will accept, honorary third-degree elder status with the Correllian tradition. Oh. I can pick him out. And Christian, for me, states every reason that I'm a witch. Same reason I started witch school. He's done in Salem, which is a goddamn tough city.
Yeah.
And everything else. And he survived here, and he's willing to help us survive here as well.
Well, that's a big important thing, by the way. It's funny because now I got this, and this is my ordination from Lori Bruno and the Tonacri, and I'm not a Strega either or a Correllian. now I'm sort of both.
You're both. So say we all, right? But so let's say that. So say we all.
That's something I want to really put across, is that when and if, and hopefully when, we won't.
It's a when, not an if, right?
If, I will it to be. And when you come here, that's the most important thing that you can get from me. Because I had to walk through that fire, and many times I had to learn the hard way. Because I come from Italian and Portuguese stock, I'm a scrapper, if somebody challenges me, sometimes I'll get in there in the scrap. And there are times when I've had to, but more often than not, there have been other ways. And the last several years for me has been learning those other ways. Realizing that, okay, there's always going to be a challenger to what you want to do. Do you fight it? Well, sometimes you have to. There are times in life where you have to be willing to stand up and fight for what you believe. But if you can find some way to sidestep, not be part of it. Because when you come here, you will find that there are a lot of traditions that have already been established here. Some of which, I have the Salem tradition of witchcraft that John and I kind of cooked up, but I don't really consider myself as much of a tradition. I just call myself a witch. I don't say eclectic or Wicca or pagan, I just say witch. But you'll have people here that will say, well, who are you? How dare you come here? But you know what? If the spirit of place is what it is at all, if it is that composite of all who are here, all who have died here, you have as much right as anyone else to contribute to that energy. And that your energy will help to define what Salem becomes in the future. But know that to do that, often you're going to have to just tune it out. It's gotten to the point now where, at least when I had the festival, I was some of them said I was a carpetbagger and I came in October and took all the money. Maybe that was sort of true. But now that I have a store and I have to work here, now they know where to find me. So, they all come in with the drama and the issues. And I had to really learn to just shut it out. I hide in the back. I'm like, just, whatever. And when I do come into contact with it, I just try to say, well, this isn't who I am. I'm here defining the piece of Salem that is a reflection of me. You're all going to be defining Salem as a reflection of each of you. It may not be necessarily who I am. It may not even be what one another are. Each of you is a unique individual. You may share things in common, like this tradition, but there are also things about every one of you that will contribute to that whole in unique and magical ways. And I think that's the most important thing any of us can do. Because then it makes us prepared to educate other people. And that, again, is the best opportunity one can have in this city, because you have the people. I remember saying to Phil once, this is the past one, he first contacted me in 1997. He says, I'm moving my church to Salem. What do you think? And I said, well, you're going to pay the price of your forebears. I said, because there are all sorts of angry Christians running around screaming, yelling, and making a scene. You know, even believe it doesn't matter. That's a New England thing. You know?
Yes.
They don't have to be Christian to do that. And they just do it here. They always find something to bitch about. And I remember when he came here, he had it really hard because a lot of people wouldn't accept him. But he has got to be the greatest uniter and most gracious person I've ever known in my life. In fact, I find that he's often a great resource of coaching for me to kind of like help me along my path, even though we're different beliefs. He sort of gives me ideas of how he handles that conflict. And now, 10 years later, you know, he does his Children's Day on the Common. He's respected by witch and non-witch alike. He has an event with my festival. He's just an overall good person, and it manifested a couple of years ago, and this comes back to that spirit of place thing, the energy of who we are and what we are as a city. And that is about 2 years ago, it was 3, because it was the year Sean was still alive, 2006. And we had that Repent America, and those are the people that come around with the cameras to all the gay pride, and they're like, we're gonna try to get you, you know, police brutality, whatever, with the camera. And they were out in front of my psychic fair, screaming and yelling. And I'm a big civil libertarian, I don't want to restrict their speech, but please don't stand in the doorway. You know, so they sort of shuffled off. And one of them tried to grab, like Leanne was walking by and they grabbed at her while she was walking by. And I said, well, this is ridiculous. So I called up Pastor Phil. And I was like, you know, we got all these crazy people, you know, and they're really harassing everybody with it. You know, is there something you can do? And Phil has this thing he calls, he does dream interpretations, psalm readings, which I sort of tease him about. And he does this thing called the confessional booth. And I remember when I came out of it, I was in tears because I thought going into it, it was going to be, you know, confess your sins. It was these people, he has all these ministers and religious workers dressed as monks. And they basically confess all the sins of Christianity when you're sitting there. We want to apologize for the witch burnings. We want to apologize for hurting gay people. We want to apologize for our treatment of women. We want to apologize. And I'm just like, I walked out and I looked at him and I said, speaking as an ad person from way back, now this is how I would market Jesus. So I called him up, I said, well, what are we going to do here? I mean, it's not like I want to restrict their speech, Phil, but they're being really loud and no one wants, you know, this is Halloween, you know, this is like, you know, the day before Halloween in the witch capital of the world, and everybody's having a blast with their fried dough and everything else, and here are these people raining on everybody's parade. He goes, hold on, I'll send you some monks. 10 minutes later, this huge throng of these Christian guys dressed as monks come down and they surround the Repent America. This is not how Jesus wants you to be. And I looked at him and I said, only in Salem. He was excommunicated from his church, the Foursquare Gospel in California, and ended up becoming independent, mostly because he was friends with me. And we ended up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, you know, witches is, you know, befriending witches in Salem is a problem. And it was his process of finding who he was, which in my mind is one of the great uniters, you know, because it's easy sometimes to do interfaith when you're dealing with UUism or, you know, left-wing traditions of Christianity. You know, you're all sort of on the same political page. You all care about the environment. You all want, you know, to do things a certain way. And so, you know, you're all pro-choice, a lot of you know. You're dealing with other religions that think politically like. It's a different thing entirely when now you're going into like, you know, Bible-thumping country and, you know, and having that work side by side. And I got to tell you, even though my mother was Catholic, when she passed away, she was always very hippie. Like, she wasn't into the Catholic thing at all. And I didn't know who. I was going to ask one of my pagan friends to do her ceremony. I said, you know, I need someone that can really speak across my Catholic family, all the witches that are going to show up for me. I had Phil do it. And I thought he did the best job anybody could have done. And I feel as though that's another opportunity here in Salem, is that interfaith thing. That we have the, and if Phil can do this, if Phil can walk into this place and there's all this dissension and there's all these Christians screaming and yelling, and if he can tone it down a notch, so it's not, so now when people think about Christianity in Salem, they're going to think about psalm readings and these cool guys dressed in monk robes. Well, maybe we can do it too. Maybe we can say, okay, you know, we've had dead raccoons thrown at buildings and all sorts of other creepy things that have gone on in this city, because God knows our religion attracts its share of black jobs, and we know this. But again, it's up to us, every one of us, to define who we are, and we can help define what witches are for a whole world that comes to see us here. But I want to thank you for this. It's so cool, and it's in the Get A colors. See, I work with the spirits, purple and black.
Thank you. And for all those reasons, Christian's become a very dear friend of mine.